Okay, Bergson and the holographic theory. Today we're talking about the deep structure of time, or deep structure of time, specifically Fay Dowker and her thoughts on consciousness and time, causal set theory, and the notion of generating space-time. So in this little channel, it's been nicely shadow banned by YouTube for some anti-freedom of speech reasons, which I don't understand. We're going to look at Fay Dowker's thoughts on consciousness and time. Fay is a professor of theoretical physics and a member of the theoretical physics group at Imperial College London. She just did this discussion on Kurt Jamungel's channel, Theories of Everything, in June. Her areas are, among other things, quantum gravity and causal set theory. She's a very disarming, charming, low-key, and veiled, I'd say, power mind. The charmingness and the low-keyness veils the intellect there, but what caught my attention? It struck me that the framing of one of the central debates on consciousness, she says, was very, very similar to a debate about the nature, the passage of time. The debate on consciousness and the debate on time are the same thing. The debate on time is the question of whether the passage of time is an illusion or is it physically real. And there's philosophers who say consciousness itself is an illusion. Then she goes on, there's either the hard problem of consciousness or there isn't, because consciousness is just an illusion, if it isn't. That mirrors the problem of the nature of the passage of time. Either the passage of time is real, and that's not accommodated in our current physics, I would say, or it's an illusion. There's nothing to explain. There's no passage of time. I claim they're the same debate. So let's see what she's going to say. Kurt says, talking process versus state. She says, I'd like to contrast not process and state, but process and event. I'd like to make a clear distinction between an event and the occurrence of an event. An event is something you can write down on a piece of paper, like saying rain in London between noon and 1 p.m. yesterday. That's an event. I'm going to say, or stirring coffee between 7:01 and 7:02 a.m. That's also an event. But yes, this event is structured by invariance laws. We can write them down along with the verbal stuff. The hand is stirring. There's a spoon there. There's a cup. There's a saucer. But can this event really be fully described? And she says that which you're staring at is not a dynamical process. So we're being forced into a rather artificial framing of the problem. One, a Gibsonian who stares at these events like myself, or a Bergsonian, with all the invariance laws, have a really hard time making. That's not a dynamical process. She goes on, but the occurrence of an event is a dynamical process. I'd like to locate this discussion in the framework of general relativity, which is great because the language of general relativity is about events, space-time events, the event of your breakfast this morning. Kurt, and I don't see process in that, at least in the general relativity description. Yes, in general relativity, there's no process. There's just events. That's right. Now let's go from general relativity to a deeper theory. In other words, causal set theory. So we need to do a tiny bit of background to understand that general relativity is just event statement she made. Earlier at 23:00, we started, by the way, about an hour and 15 minutes in. Fay had described the three pillars of causal set theory. The first being space-time is fundamentally discrete, fundamentally atomic, granulated, or pixelated. Any event in space-time can be broken up into sub-events, and you can keep dividing it into smaller and smaller bits. In general relativity, there's no limit to that subdivision, infinite divisibility, until you get to the point, the mathematical point of the continuum, where a point has no beginning or no end, and therefore can't be divided. So those, you could call them point events. So this whole podcast is made up of point events. But in causal set theory, you cannot do this infinite division. The podcast is actually made up of finitely many point events, finitely. And you can work out roughly how many events there are just by measuring the space-time volume of the podcast in Planck units, Planck time units, Planck space units cubed. So general relativity assumes the classic metaphysics, Bergson's principle of infinite divisibility, as we've noted many times, the abstract space, the 3D continuum of points, positions, mathematical points, infinitely divisible down to the mathematical point. The fourth dimension of this space is called time. That is a series of instants, or the series in reality of instantaneous 3D spaces. As the cup moves across the continuum from point to point to point, each point corresponds to an instant of time, in turn corresponding to an instant of the entire state of the universe that we'll call our cubes. So CST replaces the discrete mathematical points with, well, a little more discrete points that are a little bigger, the size of Planck units. The spatial continuum then is still discrete. Time, still discrete. We have chunks. Now, the last piece of this first point, space-time volume is emergent. It's just a measure of the number of space-time events generated by, as the title is appropriate to, a deeper structure process. So a deeper structure process is generating space-time. The second point, second pillar, causal relations are the degrees of freedom. What does survive from general relativity's continuum is causal order. The space-time events keep the structure of being causally ordered. One event, A, might precede the other, B, or they may have no order, A, no order with respect to B. The deep structure of space-time is the causal order. So this order is a remnant or still an inheritor of SR's, Special Relativity's light cone. Inside the light cone, the events are causally related, as the little X on the left shows there. And a point event at the nexus, inside that cone, all events can be influenced by that event. Outside that cone, events have no causal relationship. In fact, they're relativized. Finally, number 3, the quantum theory of CST will be based on point or path integral theory of Feynman, not Copenhagen. So there is eschewing canonical Copenhagen framework, note with its measurement collapse, because that doesn't work when you're trying to come up with quantum gravity at points near the Big Bang where there are no observers. So Feynman, the Copenhagen is not of any use there. Kurt says, so to use some continental philosophy for it, there's just being but not becoming. She says, yes, that would be a reasonable, I like that, okay, the becoming. In other words, the occurrence of an event is the birth of the space-time atoms that comprise that event. That birth process cannot be captured objectively, externally, not even in a movie. And the reason is that the atomic events that comprise the event of your breakfast or storing your coffee, they are partially ordered. So that means that some of the atomic events have no order. Kurt, there's no relation between them. There's no causal relation between them, she says. There's no fact of the matter as to whether this one happens before this one or this one before this one. They're just not ordered. There's no ordering in which they happen. This makes it very difficult to conceive of this process actually happening dynamically. Think of the growing rose. Because when you imagine this birth process, there are these atomic events. Think of them as little dots. So the dots, and if you watch the picture there, she's gesturing here, there. They're appearing. But if in a dynamical process, then they're appearing one by one. But then the two atomic events that are not ordered cannot appear one before the other because there is no order in which they appear. They don't come into being in an order. They're unordered. So this makes it very difficult to conceive of this process actually happening dynamically, i.e. the organically growing rose or the coffee being stirred, dynamic processes. but underneath them is what she says is an unordered process. So this impossible incoherent situation, to me, stems from the point event-based light cone of special relativity, where we pick a point at the intersection of the two cones there, that point E1. Again, anything inside that cone can be causally influenced, causally related, but outside the cone, they're unordered, and there's no they're relativized. Now, one could draw a line, make an extended system through that. So treat that as an extended, maybe as the rose is an extended system, where each point is a point of causal influence. This was a causal influence. But firstly, there is no system that can be truly isolated from the whole external environmental field, the whole universe. That's artificial. And secondly, there is no principle then to stop the extension of the line across the entire universe. And as such, the whole notion of non-simultaneity dies. Just the beginning of the problems. The scheme does not recognize simultaneous organic causal flows, as I've noted. These cannot be relativized, nor are the concept that objects and their motions are transfers of state within the global motion of the whole, as Bergson argued. Kurt says, this seems to complicate the problem of time. She says, yes, it does. So let's see what that has to say about conscious experiences. Now, no, she's leaving this problem behind, the difficulty of making sense of actual dynamical events like coffee stirring or the unfolding of a rose, given the unordered causal structure that's generating it. That's left behind. The proposal is that conscious experience is the occurrence of events that are neural correlates of consciousness in the brain. So we have some subject A. We have A sitting there, over there on the left. All right. There are events in their brain that our clever colleagues have identified as neural correlates of conscious experience. For example, some neural correlate of being conscious, like seeing a stop sign. So we'll put a stop sign coffee stirring in the coffee. Some event in the brain of A. So the proposal is that that event is not consciousness, because it's a dead thing. It's just something you can throw on a piece of paper and hand around. Now, I find that neural correlate being just a dead thing that's on a piece of paper is a little bit strange, because it's surely, again, a dynamical electrochemical neural flow in those neurons. How does it just become a dead thing? Don't quite get that. Continuing, there's nothing alive about that. There's nothing that has any of the qualities of conscious experience about that event. Well, that's true, but that's just another restatement of the hard problem, isn't it? That how do we get the image of the coffee cup from neural flows? Continuing, but the occurrence of the event, this coming into being of the space-time atoms that comprise that event, that's what consciousness is. That's the correlate of consciousness. The event itself is not the correlate. It's the occurrence of the event that's the correlate. So the real correlate of consciousness is the birth of our little space-time baby atoms there. But why, again, is this different from asking how atoms swirling in the brain give rise to the experience of coffee stirring? For the swirling atoms, we've just substituted the birth process of the swirling atoms, a distinction that seems to lack a difference. Continuing, and now the fact that you cannot imagine this dynamical correlate is actually a good thing, because it explains certain features, certain qualities of conscious experience, because you can understand why you cannot know what it is like to experience seeing a stop sign just by knowing the event. If you know the full neural correlate of consciousness theory, you can know what that event is. You can write it down and you can test it. You can induce this event to occur in someone's brain, and you can ask them if they see a stop sign, and if they say yes, you know you were right. But it doesn't explain what it's like. But you can't explain, you can't understand what it's like externally from the physics external to the system, because the correlate of actually having the experience is this process of the birth of the space-time atoms. And that cannot be written down. You cannot make a movie of it. You cannot imagine it in your own head. You just can't know it. But you can experience it. So what conscious experience is, it's an internal. You can experience it if you're internal to the system. You can't if you're external. But if you're part of the system, then you can have that experience. So you can know it directly without mediation. But this does not explain the origin of the image of the external world from neurochemical flows. Again, you're putting it back to a magical appeal to, and very much depending on, weighing on this impossible to order idea of the birth process of atoms, making it somewhat mystical, somewhat magical as to why we see the coffee cup. And there's another problem. So there's these qualities of conscious experience that people sometimes list. You could take them as being meaningful. You can understand them because they arise, because what experience is this process, the process of the birth of space-time atoms, and it's unceasing. So the quality of conscious experience, it's live. You can't stop it. You can't say, hold that thought and have a break from it. It's ongoing. So in other words, describing the continuous creative force of time, shall we say. Kurt, so the moment of now, something that is illusory or that is real? She says it's real, but it's not a thing, it's a process. It's the process of the birth of space-time atoms that's now. So I'm going to ask, how is the continuity of the time-extended event accounted for? For Bergson, this is an indivisible motion. It's an indivisible motion that's integrally part of the indivisible transformation of the universal field. The classic metaphysic, we have discrete states of space-time, one disappearing as the next arrives. This is where, in this metaphysic, Descartes invoked God to create cube after cube after cube. In other words, there's a continuous process behind the discreteness. By the way, remember, because cube 1 cannot cause being frozen cube 2, and cube 2 not cause cube 3. So, in other words, there's a continuous process behind the discreteness. The birthing process is implicitly relying, shall we say, on a form of Descartes' God. As Bergson argued in Creative Evolution, physics fools itself. It cannot avoid continuous creation. With Fay, the Causal Set Theory, each cube has the duration of a Planck time unit, not that of a mathematical point. Is this enough to defeat the frozen block problem? There's no way to transition from cube 1 to cube 2, given they're absolutely instantaneous, and why Descartes then needed a God for this, perhaps? This is still an implicit continuous process behind the scenes. Why not just say time, the transformation of the universal field, is continuous, indivisible, along with the space? Why? Why this need for this deep structural process and yet generating a time that's discrete, which brings back all these problems? How also is CST different from Bergson? That is, how are they not describing that time as a force? So Kurt goes on, both the process and the thing are real? Yes, I did not put it in this paper because it was a bit risky. It's to say it's a kind of dualism, but there's two types of things. Kurt, people don't like that. Fay says, yes, people don't like that. That's why I didn't say it. There's the stuff. There's the physical 4D stuff, space-time, world lines, atoms, field configurations, four-dimensional stuff. But then there's the process in which that stuff comes to be. So there are different types of things, but they're both physical. The birth process is objective. The stuff is not objective because there's an arbitrary subjective cutoff that you impose if you want to talk about spacetime. Spacetime up to when? And you just put on some arbitrary space-like hypersurface, and spacetime is now real via your arbitrary move. So putting a Bergsonian cast on this, remember Bergson visualized this internal process as an intensive order, as consciousness, the inextensive, continuously creating, where there's a relaxation of this inner tension, projecting, shall we say, extensity. That is space, but not discrete space, transforming indivisibly in duration, indivisibly, matter extended. Physics takes this extensity and duration and pushes it into the abstract 3D continuum of points, positions, with time the fourth dimension of instants. This is the basis of physics mathematical order, this metaphysic. But it's an ideal limit, as Bergson stated. It's never reached. So that's the temporal metaphysic, duration extensity, the classic metaphysic, abstract space, abstract time. So again, the ideal limit of the temporal metaphysic is the classic metaphysic, but again, it has no positive reality, no ontological status, this ideal limit. But physics inherently tries to claim the opposite. For example, the little points are discrete chunks, quantum chunks, Planck chunks, 10 to the minus 35th centimeter square. So they won't release that framework. So she says, so the physical stuff, the description of the physical stuff has a subjective element to it, but the process is completely objective. But the struggle one has with the process is that you can't view it from the outside. Physicists would love to have a God's eye view of the world, to see the world there in the corner, the whole thing. You can't see that. The only way you can see or experience or apprehend the process is to be inside it. There's no God's eye view in this conception. Again, let's put a Bergson gloss. The holographic field that Bergson envisioned, indivisibly transforming. Okay, this field is not imageable. It's simply a giant interference pattern, say of waves traveling everywhere. A reconstructive wave passed through the hologram, as in the picture above, or the brain passing through this hologram, as in the other lower picture, is specific now to a source. Now is an image now within that unimageable field. That is the cup. But it's not the cup in itself, with all its relations to itself and to the external field. It's just an aspect of the cup. The source, that is the cup, is virtual, a possibility within the field, within these real actions floating everywhere, going everywhere. So everything is an image. The cups, atoms, neurons, brains. There's no God's eye view, that is from without, of any of these. You're always only perceiving an image via this reconstructive wave process. And of course, we're building all our theories, all of physics, on this basis of selecting aspects of the universe. And of course, always trying to get back to the whole. That's the difficulty. So there's no God's eye view in this conception of Bergson's either. She goes on. There's also some nice consequences of this, all sorts of things that feel right about consciousness, things that are natural because they are just properties of the process. This idea that it's private, that it's unshareable with someone else, that's because you can't copy it. There's no objective external view of it. I can't make a copy of it and hand to you and say, ah, yeah. You say, ah, yeah. Only I can experience it. But these consequences are not there. There's no explanation of the origin of the image of the external world, or of the origin of the specified scale of time in the qualium fly, buzzing flies, heron-like flies. the quality of dynamic forms, rotating cubes versus wobbly plastic deforming knot cubes, the time extension of perception, stirring spoons, twisting falling leaves. So postscript. Causal set theory is devoted to the problem of quantum gravity. Hence one reason for their choice of the Planck time and Planck length, units as discrete chunks of space and time. As these incorporate, as you can see from the equations, Planck's constant, h bar, and the gravitational constant in their definition. They cling, however, Fay notes this, to relativistic Lorentz invariance. As usual, not realizing that true special relativity Lorentz invariance destroys the twin paradox and physics' supposed explanation of slowing clocks on jets, longer living muons, and that this alone would force a massive revision of physics. Nor do they register that the whole concept of there's no motion of time, where Fay started, comes from this invalid interpretation of special relativity. Nor that, as Newton would still say, hypothesis non fingo of gravity. I have no hypotheses about gravity. They still have not, other than a mathematical description, described the gravitational force. Nevertheless, they, along with other folks in physics, for example, Smolin, certainly seem to be nearing the position of Bergson. Time is a force. Next, we'll see. Again, plug this little book. Till then, signing off.